Okay, everybody, welcome back to AP US History. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the Restoration Colonies. These are the colonies that were basically started as proprietorships or ownerships that were granted by King Charles II of England to men who helped him reclaim the throne of England after the death of Oliver Cromwell, who hopefully you guys remember that name because he was the guy who was the winner of the English Civil War when the people who were in favor of a strong parliament in English government fought and won against people who were loyal to the king and liked a strong monarchy. All right, so that is why they have this name. So let's go ahead and just dive on in. And we're going to start by looking at the colony of New York. All right. So, the main thing that you need to know about New York is originally it was settled by the Dutch, not the English. The English will take over later on. All right. Now, the 1600s, the Dutch are doing really, really well. All right. So, they have a huge trading empire going on. They have a pretty good sized navy. They hold their own against the best of them. They're making a lot of money doing trading businesses, right? They are the biggest challenge that England has on the open waters as far as like naval power and trading reach, like all the people that they do business with. The Dutch and the English were two of the first colonies, well, colonizing countries to get to China and start doing business with the Chinese. So that's a big deal right there. All right. There are going to be three major wars between the English and the Dutch, called the Anglo-Dutch Wars. Right? The Dutch, they are a major colonial power, mostly in the East Indies. So that is basically modern-day Indonesia. They had a control over a number of islands there. It was staging ground for getting up and doing trade with China. They would stop in India. They had trading posts all around Africa as well. All right. Henry Hudson. He is an explorer who actually sailed for the Dutch first before he worked for anybody else. And he is going to found basically New Netherlands. But something you also need to know is that he is the guy that the Hudson River is named after. He sailed up into northern Canada through the Hudson Strait here, which is, of course, named after him. And also, he is the guy who we get the Hudson Bay from. All right. And he gets a very tragic end. During the winter of 1610 and 1611, I believe it was, it's the following year, 1611 to 1612. He, his son, and about seven other men who stayed loyal to him were actually the victims of a mutiny on his ship, and they were basically set adrift in a lifeboat where they died due to starvation and exposure to the elements because it was winter time. So they basically froze to death out on the Hudson Bay. So, yeah, not a great end to a great explorer. But switching to New Netherlands, which is basically the colony that's going to be established along the Hudson River, which empties into this harbor right down here where the arrow's pointing for 1609, right where there is a rather large island. This place is going to be establishment of a Dutch West India Company that is going to work in the fur trade. Animal skins like beaver, fox, bear, deer, otter, things like that, that are a trade luxury for making fancy clothing and things in Europe. All right. Now, the Dutch company is not going to pay a lot of attention to how the colony is being run. They just want the products that they want, the raw materials. And this colony is going to be based on the island of Manhattan, which at this time, the colony, the settlement that is built there, is going to be called New Amsterdam. So you should be taking that to understand that New York City, as it is today, was originally established as New Amsterdam by Dutch settlers. All right. And it was purchased like it was basically the equivalent of like $1,200 worth of goods in today's money was traded to the local native people and purchased for basically the island, the whole island. So, one of the best trade deals for a colonial country who's trying to establish colonies, but a horrible deal for the natives who basically got screwed out of their land. All right. So, New Amsterdam Harbor. They're going to basically want to run this place like a business. Stockholders, people have an interest financially in the success of this colony, so they want it to do well. No interest in religion or free speech or democracy. They just want to make money. They can put whatever, so they're going to put whatever rules in place that are going to help them keep making money. Governors are appointed by the company. They are basically autocratic, and by autocratic, I mean they are like dictators. Whatever they say is what the rules are. All right, religious dissenters against the Dutch Reformed Church, including Quakers, were persecuted. So if you did not agree with whatever the religious practices were of New Holland or New Amsterdam, all of these places that are Dutch controlled here, you are basically kicked out, and if you stay, it's not going to be pleasant for you. All right, very limited power for the governing bodies if you're not the governor itself. So there's going to be a lot of protests, not going to really amount to a whole lot. It's going to gain some tensions against the ruling class of the colony. All right, let's look at a couple characteristics of New Amsterdam. Aristocratic, patronships. So basically, we're going to have a land-owning class. It's basically what that means. There are landowners and there are people who work the land for them. All right, cosmopolitan, we're going to have a diverse group of people. It's going to be very much a city on the rise. So there's going to be people of many different nationalities because Dutch people, not a lot of them actually wanted to go. So the Dutch West India Trading Company would actually have to go to other countries to basically find people who would go and work for them in New Amsterdam. So there would be French people, there'd be English people, Spanish, there would be Germans, there would be Jewish people. You would find a whole slew, a very diverse group working and living in the New Netherlands colony. All right, New York manors and land grants. Okay, so this is like the territory that's going up the Hudson River. And there are going to be large land holdings that people are going to own. And yeah, all right, New Netherlands and New Sweden. The Swedish people are actually going to be coming into the area as well, working for the Dutch West India Trading Company. All right, so Swedes in New Netherlands. So Sweden, they're going to basically come under an area near New Netherlands called New Sweden. And the Dutch are under this guy who was a governor, Peter Stuyvesant. He's going to attack New Sweden, this neighboring colony. And basically, he takes over with very little effort at all. And yeah, they're basically just absorbed right into New Netherland, expanding their control and hold over land and power in the region. All right. Now, New Netherlands becomes part of the British royal colonies. And this is going to be because Charles II, that king that I mentioned before, who was basically put back in place after Oliver Cromwell died, he is going to grant New Netherlands land to his brother, the Duke of York, before the British even controlled the area. So it's like, all right, bro, what we're going to do is we're going to take over this land, and then it's going to be yours. And we're going to name it after you, too. All right, so that's the deal. So 1664, English soldiers are going to come into the area. The Dutch, they were not able to put up much of a fight. A lot of the colonists didn't like how the governor, Peter Stuyvesant, was running things, so they kind of just sat to the side and just let the English come in and take over. And Stuyvesant, he surrenders. Basically, no fighting happens, and the colony is renamed New York. So that is how New York got its name. All right. Now, the harbor, New York Harbor, very, very important. Very, very deep waters. So ships, you could sail them right up to the land and unload the ships and load them up right there. You don't have to get on the small boats and just row out to a ship, a couple hundred yards offshore. You can just load right onto the ship directly. It saves a lot of time, money, and effort. And, say you got to get out on the water quickly, like if you're chasing down a pirate or something, you just hop on your ship and you're on your way. All right, so now England is going to have basically, when you start seeing all these colonies we talk about from, the last two lessons and this one today, uh, England's going to have basically the entire eastern seaboard of the North American continent. So, like all of the Atlantic coastline. That's a pretty big deal. All right. Now, the original charter, the original amount of territory that Duke of York controls. Basically, it's New Jersey, Manhattan Island, a good about half of Connecticut, the western third of Massachusetts, and a big chunk of what would become the greater New York colony, as well as a piece of property up in Quebec, which is in Canada, as well as some of the islands that are south of the hook of Massachusetts, like you see down here. So that hook is actually over here, so there's some islands further up this way. All right. New Amsterdam, here is one artist rendering of what it looked like back when the Dutch were in control, right before the British took over. All right, here's just some more paintings of like people from the area. All right, now New York, British control. Doesn't really look too different, does it? Maybe just some more houses, the population's growing. All right, here's an idea of what New York City coin looked like back in the late 1600s, early 1700s. All right, wish I could have some of those in my coin collection. All right, so there are still some buildings in New York that have influence from the Dutch history of the area. All right, such as the Dutch Revival Building in New York, this, the Seal of New York City. This is a person wearing Dutch style clothing, and that's the seal of the city. So, yeah, that's a big deal. They definitely held on to some of the Dutch history. So, like Harlem and Brooklyn, those are Dutch names. Architecture, there is still some influence in the older buildings, like you see in that picture there of, uh, customs. So, like the whole idea behind Easter eggs, Santa Claus, waffles, Belgian waffles, the sport of bowling, sleigh riding, like the horse-drawn sleighs, skating, like ice skating, golf. These are some things that the Dutch brought to New York that stuck. All right, next we're going to talk about Pennsylvania. Okay, so for Pennsylvania, the number one thing to know is it's settled by the Quakers. Now, the Quakers get their name because of their strong religious beliefs and practices where they would basically quake or shake due to their worship, their devotion. So like they would be shaking with like fervor for the Lord. All right. They would they offended a lot of religious and secular, so religious and governmental leaders in England. So they would be refusing to pay taxes to support the Church of England because they didn't share the beliefs. Uh, they met without paid clergy, so the priests they just preached because they felt that it was something they needed to do, not because they wanted to make a living doing it. They believed everyone were children of God and refused to treat upper classes with any extra reverence because of their status socially. They would keep their hats on in church. It was kind of an odd thing. People usually took their hats off. Uh, we're also going to see they would not take oaths, like to be like loyal to the church or to anybody in particular because their loyalty was to God. And big identifiers. They are pacifists, meaning they don't fight in war. They don't believe in killing in that type of way. The only killing that they're willing to do is animals for food, really. All right. Here's one artist depiction of what a Quaker meeting hall would look like. You have men on one side, women on the other. People who are speaking stand, everyone else sits and listens. William Penn. I think you can see where this guy's name is going. He is an aristocrat from England who is going to get very involved with the Quaker faith. He becomes like the quintessential Quaker. All right. And I guess he saw the horrors of war during his time in the military, and it's going to basically make him go towards a life of peace. So he's going to receive a land grant from the king from helping restore the monarchy to England. And he's going to establish a colony with the land grant he's given by King Charles II. Now, this is partially in payment for a debt that was owed to Penn's family by the king. And the colony, of course, is going to be Pennsylvania, which basically means Penn's woodland or Penn's forest. And he's going to send people to advertise to settlers to go there. And he kept it honest, like, hey, it's a big wilderness. There's like nothing there. We have to build it ourselves. There are going to be, wild natives that live there that we're going to have to contend with. So, it could be rough, but the payout will be worth it type of deal. That's kind of what he's going there for advertising. And the chance at getting land would be a big draw for a lot of people to immigrate there. Right. So this right here is just one example that has been recovered by historians and archaeologists of like how he would grant. This is like the grant that came to William Penn from the king. And Penn would have something similar for the people he would grant land to within his colony. Now, Penn and the Native Americans. Now, he would buy land from the natives, and they would not go armed when dealing with the natives. So it was very, very peaceful. But a lot of people who were not Quakers would also come into Pennsylvania as well. That's where more of the tensions that happen in Pennsylvania will come from. Not really the Quakers, though. Right? And those people would treat the natives badly. Just like I said, tensions will rise because of that. And this would actually undermine or like put holes in the story and the good feelings that the Quakers want to have, the good relations with the natives. All right. Penn, he's going to have a treaty with the natives basically so that they can live peacefully together, coexisting. Of course, the people who are not Quakers are going to throw a monkey wrench into that every so often. Now, the government of Pennsylvania, of the colony itself, representative assembly. So basically, it's like a Congress. No tax supported church, so you could practice freely religious tolerance. All right. You're forced to deny right to vote and hold office to Catholics and Jews by English government. So what this is saying is Catholics and Jewish people living in the Pennsylvania colony were not allowed to vote. Anybody else who lived there could because they were Protestant, meaning they were not Catholic or Jewish. Death penalty only for treason and murder. That's it. Fair enough. All right. Otherwise, imprisonment. All right. Compared to 200 capital crimes in England. So, like, you could be killed for 200 different types of crimes back in England, but only for these two, treason and murder, if you're in Pennsylvania. Now, society in Pennsylvania, we're going to get a lot of different people coming in. People who were being persecuted for their religious beliefs, they're going to be coming to Pennsylvania because you can practice more freely. You're going to have a lot of different ethnic groups, like a lot of the same ones that I was saying for New York. You're going to have, the French, you're going to have Germans. A lot of Germans go to Pennsylvania. Everyone's heard of the Pennsylvania Dutch, right? That actually comes from Pennsylvania Deutsch, and Deutsch is German, the German word for German. So, like Germany in German is actually Deutschland, like land of the Deutsch, land of the Germans. All right, moving on. They pretty much have no military defense set up because they are pacifists. They are peace-loving people. Anybody could immigrate there. They didn't care, really. So no restrictions, no slavery in Pennsylvania. So that was a big deal. They were the first ones to be like, no slaves at all. We don't want them here. Right. They would have something called the Blue Laws, which would be against stage plays, against cards, against dice. So basically, no gambling, no. It was basically a way to keep people from falling in morality, keeping people good, behaving themselves. All right. Philadelphia and Boston. So Philadelphia is more of a planned city. It's built into a grid pattern, very easy to navigate, a lot of straight roads. You're not winding through and getting lost and like confused all the time like you do in Boston. That's the best way to compare. Better planning in Philadelphia. Okay. So if you look at the cities here, the population growth, Philadelphia, basically nonstop growth. It's going to become one of the biggest and most populated cities in the British colonies during colonial times. Over the course of this 125 years that shows the growth, yeah, they're the fastest growing and highest population city in the British colonies. New York gets a slower start and it's a slower incline, but it's still pretty quickly. Boston kind of just comes and jolts around a little bit. Charleston, South Carolina, pretty steady, just a slow rate of growth. All right, let's talk about New Jersey a little bit, my home state. All right, so originally New Jersey, they are owned by aristocratic, so nobility, who were given the area from the Duke of York. And they are then going to really get a lot of people from New England, like moving to New Jersey to populate it. Uh, because a lot of the farmland up in New England is going to get worn out, they depleted a lot of the nutrients, so they want to move to a place where they can, farm. So they come to New Jersey, and originally New Jersey was divided in half. You see this diagonal line going across it right here? You have East New Jersey and West New Jersey. And in 1674, West New Jersey was sold to the Quakers, so like the Pennsylvania people. So technically, Pennsylvania used to include half of the southern half of New Jersey. But East New Jersey is also going to eventually be acquired by the Quakers. But in 1702, East and West New Jersey are combined into one New Jersey and are formed as their own colony. So, comparatively speaking, with the other colonies that the British had in North America, New Jersey is one of the younger colonies. It was only around its own like independent colony for 74 years before the American Revolution gets going, whereas the others may have been around for 100 years or more already by that point. All right, let's talk about Delaware. That is the neighbor to the south of New Jersey. All right, so Delaware is going to be named after Lord Delaware, which was a governor in Virginia back in the early 1600s during the hard times. So, like the starving times, as we talked about when we were talking about Virginia. And Pennsylvania is very closely related to Pennsylvania. And in 1703, they are granted their own assembly, so it's their own government. And they're going to remain under control of Pennsylvania all the way until the American Revolution. So they were never actually an independent colony, technically speaking. Like they were counted as separate, but Pennsylvania basically called the shots. All right, ethnic groups. Germans, we're going to see a lot of areas where there's a high population of Germans, mostly in the western area, central or western areas of colonies like Pennsylvania. The Germans, like the Pennsylvania Deutsch that I was talking about before, they're in central Pennsylvania. Virginia, which at this time included West Virginia, it was all one Virginia. The Germans are going to settle in the Blue Ridge area, like the Blue Ridge Mountains, like think Charlottesville, kind of in that area. South Carolina is also going to see a decent chunk of German settlement in the western area. And all of these other greenish kind of areas that you see on the map, that is areas that are less than 50% of the people being German who are settling there. And then we look over at the Scottish and Irish descent people. Much, much higher populations in those areas, but it's a lot of the same areas in the colonies. All right, so that's a good breakdown there. Now let's talk about the Carolinas. Now, the West Indies, they are going to help establish with the Carolinas a group of English farmers from the West Indies. So that's like the Caribbean islands. They're going to, in 1670, come to Carolina. So, yeah, they were at one time one territory. They will later be divided, kind of like how New Jersey was in two pieces, then brought together. This is the opposite. One Carolina that later splits. Now, they were basically pushed out of the Caribbean by more powerful sugar plantation runners, and they brought their black slaves with them, and basically an idea of how to run things with the Barbados Slave Code, basically how you manage a plantation. Now, The Carolinas are named for King Charles II, and the king is going to grant Carolina to 8 supporters, 8 people who supported him in becoming the King of England. Now, they're hoping to use Carolina to supply their plantations back in Barbados with food and wine, silk, olive oil, and trade everything with Europe. Now, it's going to work a very different kind of way. So the lower south, them getting settled, this is the Carolinas, and we will be talking about Georgia as well. Now, colonizing the Carolinas, they're going to have close economic ties with the West Indies, with the Caribbean. So that's going to mean there's going to be more of the plantation style of agriculture. A lot of Carolina settlers were originally from the Caribbean. Now, they would use the local Indians, the Savannah tribe, enslaving them and sending them to work in the West Indies, and some even went to New England. This is not going to work out very well because, disease really hurts the populations, and the Savannah, they're actually going to migrate up to Pennsylvania to escape the enslavement policies of the Carolinas, because in Pennsylvania, there's a lot better relations with the Englishmen. Now, Pennsylvania, they're basically promising to be better. And then they are going to, in Carolina, thin the Savannahs before they could leave. So they basically start to just attack and kill as many of them as they can and get most of them within the next 3 years. Now, Charlestown, this is going to become a big trading center in the Carolinas, also named for, Charles II, Charlestown, after King Charles the King. And it's going to be the busiest port city, biggest trading city in the South. Right? It had a very English feel to it. It was run by the rich people, the aristocracy, the nobles, and it just felt like you would be back in England. Religious toleration attracted a large group of different people. You're going to have the Germans, Irish, English, French. In some areas, you're going to have all the different diversities that you might expect up further north. Maybe not so much with Catholics and Jews, though. Now, crops in the Carolinas, rice. America actually has its own natural rice grain that would grow here. And this was one of the biggest exports of the Carolinas, is wild rice that they would grow on plantations. Right? Rice is a very exotic food at this time in England. So yes, they really wanted it. It was grown in Africa, and so it was actually brought to America originally when the first slaves started being brought over. And it would basically take over and become a cash crop where they would make a lot of money by farming it. These slaves that brought it over, they had a genetic trait that made them immune to malaria, and you grow rice in very wet and watered areas. So that's a breeding ground for mosquitoes. And because the slaves had a immunity to malaria, they could work in these conditions and not just fall sick and die like a lot of white people would have during this time, and the natives during this time, because they did not have medicines that could cure them of malaria. That's not going to happen until the 1800s. Now, by 1710, black slaves are the majority in Carolina. So, yeah, plantations all become big business in Carolinas. Another big cash crop is indigo. This is a flower that is used to dye clothing blues and purples. All right. Now, today, its main use is as a dye for blue jeans and for other work clothing. So yeah, it's always been used for dyeing. Right? Exports, rice and indigo, especially rice, big time moneymakers. All right, conflict with Spanish Florida. Because during all of this time, when all these colonies are being established by the English, the Spanish are still doing their thing, and they actually control Florida. Like the territory that we think of today as Florida, they had it. So Catholic Spain, they did not like having the Protestant English like near their colonies' borders. So there's going to be some issues. We're going to get the Anglo-Spanish Wars in the colonies. And the Spanish, they're going to raid Carolina, whether it's by boat or by land. And they're going to attack different settlements. They're going to also antagonize Native Americans to attack the Carolinas. Excuse me. And by 1700, Carolina was way too strong to be wiped out by the Spanish. So there's going to have to start becoming some arrangements. And those arrangements would be more peaceful in nature. Now, when the separation is going to begin, the northern part of Carolina is sharing a border with Virginia. And Virginia was dominated by the aristocratic planters, who were generally Church of England members. And people from Virginia who didn't agree with some of the things, they would move to North Carolina. And they're going to bring their ideas with them. Poor farmers are going to be moving there, didn't need slaves, religious dissenters, and we're going to start getting some distinctive traits of North Carolinians. Irreligious and hospitable to pirates. Like it's going to be a haven for like Blackbeard, one of the most famous pirates of all time. Strong spirit of resistance to authority. Kind of goes hand in hand with pirates. So basically, quote unquote, troublemakers tend to like North Carolina during this time. So North Carolina is officially going to separate from South Carolina in 1712. All right, let's go ahead and talk about Georgia, and then we will be done for the day. So, Southern colonies, we have North and South Carolina, and now we're going to talk about Georgia. So, Georgia is a much later established colony. It's the last one to really be established, 1733. It is founded, and it's named in honor of King George II. I believe this one is the father of King George III, who is the English king during the American Revolution. Right? The colony is founded by James Oglethorpe. Georgia is going to be acting as a buffer between the rest of the British colonies from South Carolina on up to Massachusetts and New Hampshire. It's going to be a border between them and the Spanish in Florida. All right. And also between Louisiana, where the French are. So, yeah, they're basically a buffer between here, all this, and here. Like this wraps around nicely, and it's a big buffer, a big cushion in case the Spanish or French ever get uppity. They can be stopped in Georgia. All right. Big exports. Silk and wine are going to be big products coming out of Georgia during colonial times. It's also going to be a haven for debtors. So, say you're over in England, you take out a loan, you're not able to pay it back, so you're in debt, right? If you owe debts that you can't pay, you go to prison at this time. And if you're going into debtor's prison, you can be sent to different prison colonies that the British have, and Georgia is going to be one of the places that acts as a debtor colony. So people who owed money and couldn't pay are sent to Georgia against their will. right? And Georgia, at least early on in its colonial history, was determined to keep slavery out. But slavery found its way in about 17 years later in 1750. All right. So the trustees of Georgia, these are basically the guys who governed Georgia. Right, you can see them all here interacting with local natives, trying to make some types of land deals. Savannah, it's one of the big port cities of Georgia, big trade center. It's going to be a very diverse community. A lot of different groups of people. You're going to have Spanish people in the area. You're going to have some French people in the area. You're going to have, of course, English people, Irish, Scottish, German, a little bit of everything. Right? Anybody who's Christian, except for Catholics, got to practice what they wanted. Missionaries would work among the debtors and the native population to basically try and convert them to Protestantism, as well as trying to make them better people, quote unquote. And the most famous of them being this guy named John Wesley. You may or may not need to know that name, but just know he was a famous missionary in Georgia during colonial times before the American Revolution. All right, that is where we're going to leave off for today. And yeah, be sure to do your work related to this lesson, and we will get back into it for more next time.